Had a good day of apple picking? Well, day, a few minutes. There's so many apples, it's not like it's a big difficult thing. It takes a few minutes and you got enough apples to freeze dry 3 or 4 batches of them probably. So we got a few bags of them and we'll test them out. And these are Fuji's, so these are not ones that I would really use for pies or applesauce, but they're great for snacking. Okay. We're gonna come over into this space.
Yep.
Because like up here, looks like some really nice ones. Good size, good color. Getting Fuji's today. We're going to get ready for 586. I'm doing some of the sliced apples from the apples that we picked at the orchard a little while ago. We're going to get the apples into the trays. Freeze-dried apples are one of my favorite freeze-dried things. They are so good. Batch 588 has been in there for 33 and a half hours. So I'm going to get this set up for another batch of apples. I'm going to start with tray 1. Still have a couple more batches of apples. It's time to prep the rest of the apples. The concentration that I came up with that seemed to work well is using 4 teaspoons of the ascorbic acid and 4 teaspoons of the citric acid in 2 liters of water. I don't know if some other concentration would work. I don't even know if you need both of these, maybe one or the other, but I haven't done any tests on that. I did do tests on the combination of these, and then at concentrations of that concentration, half that concentration, and a quarter of that concentration. This concentration kept the fruit from turning brown for more than 24 hours sitting just in the refrigerator. So actually 48 hours. But at 1/4 strength, they did turn brown in just a few hours. And at half strength, they turned brown a little bit around the edges. So it may have been possibly even the fruit was just more ripe. But I wasn't going to take a chance, and this tasted good, and it was really nice, and it adds some vitamin C to it, at least a little bit. That's what I'm going to use on these also. And then I find that I can use, for subsequent batches, I can just add another like a half teaspoon, and it works out fine. And this is just a half teaspoon, so I need 2 of those. And as I said, I don't know if I need both of these. I need to do another experiment, and I'll try to save an apple, or if I need to, I'll get another apple, and I'll try just one component of it and switching them around with the various concentrations until I find what's the minimum that works. I mean, obviously I want to use the least amount possible because it does cost some money. It goes a long ways too, because if I'm doing lots of batches in a row, all I have to do is just add a little bit more each time. Okay, so then I'll add the 2 liters of water. We'll start getting some apples prepped. So I've got it set up like I usually do. I've got a paper towel down here to catch any juice that comes off there so it's not sitting around on the counter. I've got the laser pointed through the center of the hole and right to the center of the little prongs. And I just put the apple centered on the prong area, and then I look at the front of the apple and point the laser right at the blossom end and slide it on. That way I've got it as centered as I can get it, and I'm not using the peeler attachment, so I'm just slicing and coring. And then this, you can see I hit a seed here and here. That means there's going to be a piece of core inside the apple that has to be removed. So that's where I cut it in half and then use the little scoop to cut out the rest of that core. If we're going to use them in something, we want them peeled because the peel's not good rehydrated. But if we're just going to have them for snacking, then having the peel on is just fine. Now that one, see, that one's really nice and clean, barely has anything. This one I can just cut in. This one I could just cut into rings. And this big apple just simply has a bigger core, and so the core is sticking out all over the place. And so this one I can see some of the seeds in the core. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it in half. And then take the slices above and below that, and then just cut a little bit bigger piece out using a scoop. That way I keep nice half-round slices, which really look good. I mean, you don't have to. I do a lot of them in quarters, even quarter slices, because then you don't have to worry about them breaking as much when they're freeze-dried. But these look good, and even whole rings. I'll try to do some with whole rings, but when I do the core, if I see any of these seeds coming through, and especially if they're cut, I know that it wasn't centered enough, and then I'm going to have some of that core on the apple, so I cut that out. Okay, so this core, you can see it's very well centered. I've got little teeny pieces because the core itself is pretty good size, but there's no parts of the seeds or anything showing through. So I know if I want, I could cut this one just into rings and leave it. Oops, almost did it wrong. So if I just cut from the center down, then that leaves rings, which are really beautiful in a bag. So especially if I'm doing them for gifts, like for Christmas or something, then I'll want to try some of them as rings because they just look so good. But I also should probably have 2 bowls to keep them separate. This is another one that has a bit of core in it, so I'm going to go in half. These 3 slices have a little bit of the seed and core in it. I can see some core. And some apples just have a bigger diameter core. And so sometimes there's just nothing you can do with the size of core that this machine takes out. You're just going to have to cut some of it out. And you could also, of course, use a knife to cut them. And I'm not peeling these. If I were going to use them for pie or some kind of fruit filling right later, then I would peel them. For snacking on, I like them with the peel on. I think they look better. They taste just fine. The peel when it's dry isn't a problem. It's when you go to rehydrate it, the peel and the rest of the apple doesn't rehydrate the same. Well, this one had a bit of a bruise on that part. Could have gotten hit by hail, because I know that's what fruit looks like if it's been hit by hail. Early on, the outside is completely healed, but you have that piece on the inside. Okay, this time I'm doing something that I rarely do, and that's I'm putting them directly on the trays. That's something I rarely do. So I've got tray 1 here and tray 2. I'll get these loaded up, and then we'll weigh them and get them in the freezer for pre-freezing. So something I usually don't do. So I'm going to drain the apples as I go, and then I will still put the thermometer in. And I'm going to try to load them up as best I can, especially with these nice round slices. I'm going to pile them 3 high, and I'm not sure how they're going to fit, just because it's a lot of space in those. Okay. And then I'll also just start putting the half slices on there. And I'll go ahead, I'll start with this side. Now I'll weigh that one. This one needs more. And I'll put these on there, but I need to peel a few more or slice a few more to fill up this tray. So maybe another apple or two. So I'll get that real quick. And these will go into the freezer and wait their turn in just a few hours. I almost forgot the thermometer. So I weighed the tray, it's 1866 without the thermometer. Then I'll get this in there. I'll just tuck it in there so that it will be freezing in there also. That might not weigh as much, but that's what that tray has, so we'll get the weight on that one. This tray is definitely a lot lighter, a couple of 100 grams lighter. I really should load it up more. And that's one of the problems with these big slices. It's harder to load them up. The quarter, if cutting them into quarters instead of halves, that gives me the best weight per tray. So that one goes to the freezer too. With this set, I'm going to cut all of this set into quarters. And I still have to check for the core, especially with these bigger apples, and kind of separate it out. The pieces that need some core cut and the pieces that don't. And I can still, you could just use a knife even, but this leaves the same curve in it, so it looks good as a slice out of the bag. Because one of the things that I found is if you got a bad spot on the outside and you use this scoop to take it out, well then later it looks more like somebody took a bite out of it, and that's not as nice in the bag. You could slice them with a knife. You could also use one of those crosshatch kind of French fry cutters. I would still core the apple and then slice it through. You could just use one of the round corers and then slice the apple, but then you'd have like sticks of apples. But I personally like the slices. But the sticks would be really good with caramel sauce. With two people doing this, you can go through the apples fast. You could do 100 pounds in a day with no problem, as long as you have freezer space to put them. And with this mix of citric acid and ascorbic acid, vitamin C, you can even refrigerate them just fine overnight. So you don't have to necessarily get them all in the freezer right away. Okay, we'll be back when I get the rest of these. I've got 6 more apples. I'll get those placed in here, and then we'll get them on the trays. So I'll use the little colander scoop and just scoop them out of the bowl and let them drain a bit. That's good enough. I mean, I could put a few more on, but I don't have any more right now. The next ones will go on regular cookie sheets and pre-freeze that way. I'll get these weighed, I'll put thermometers in them and get them in the freezer. We'll see them after they've been frozen. So the apples that I'm putting in right now are the ones I put on the tray just a little while ago in the video, but they've actually been sitting in the freezer for a week. We borrowed other trays to do the candy for number 1 child. So these have been sitting in the freezer. This is probably the longest I've ever had stuff sitting in the freezer on the freeze dryer trays, because usually we either do bags or the little pans. Anyway, now they're ready to go in there and we'll finally get back to food. And of course these are really cold because they just came out of the freezer, so they're all down to about 0 degrees Fahrenheit. In fact, that one says about 5 below. And so does that one. So, and that's pretty normal, somewhere between 0 and 5. So somewhere between -5 and +5 is where we keep our freezer and ready for freeze drying. Now I'm using the little frosting spatula and twisting it in that gap back there to make sure that the seal is touching and has a ring all the way around. Then I don't have to worry about air coming across there and freezing on the seal. And that has happened a couple of times before I started doing this. Of course, now that I'm doing this, the air can't get there and freeze, so it's never happened again. It wasn't a big problem because as soon as the vacuum pump starts, it pulls in some air across there and melts that little bit of ice. But in the meantime, it's pulling that air across there to melt that ice, which is, the air is scorching hot in comparison to the temperature in there. That's -40, this is about 70, 60, 70. So it's a huge temperature difference. I've got the drain valve closed, I've got the seal on there. Now all I've got to do is wait till it gets cold. The chamber's already cold, the freezing unit's already cold. The apples were cold when I put them in there. It won't take long until they're cold enough to start. But one last thing, since I was just doing the candy batch and didn't stop the machine, now I need to start and stop the machine. Nope. Now I need to stop and then restart the machine so it'll start the new cycle. So we'll get that taken care of. And I've mentioned this before, but mine is an old 2017 machine, which I just love all the controls of. So I'm going to hit no defrost, followed by customize, start custom, and start, or continue. So it's saying that the temperature probe on the second tray up is 13 degrees right now. And I know from my thermometer inside, the barrel temperature is more than 30 below zero right now. So it's pretty cold actually. Even the apples are colder than that. They're from -5 to +5. So it's actually all colder than that. I've got the cooling fan blowing across the vacuum pump to help keep it cool. I've got the chamber closed. Everything's set. It'll be done in about 2 days. So don't go away, I'll be back in just a second. The freeze dryer finished its cycle 11 hours ago during the night. And I came down an hour ago to restart it, to rewarm it, so I could take them out and weigh them, because the food inside is about 50 below zero right now. So obviously two things, I'd get freezer burn in my hands trying to take them out if I didn't have gloves on. And also they're going to get condensation on them like immediately. So there's no point in that. So I came down an hour ago to restart it, but I forgot the tripod. It took me an hour to remember to come back with the tripod. And then when I started to come back down, I forgot the tripod again, so I had to go back up and get it again. Now I'm going to restart it and let it warm up again before we take them out. Because like I said, it's cold in there. And then when they're rewarmed, we'll come back, take them out, weigh them, put them back in for 2 more hours, and get a weight check on them. So this is my note from last night. It was going to finish about 2 a.m. and it'd be 34 hours. And now it's 45 hours. So I'm going to add more time. And if you had warm trays, you could use that on the newer ones. Close the drain valve, never got opened. And it says it's -69 Fahrenheit in there. And that could be true. It's really ridiculously cold in there. So we'll get that rewarmed and we'll be back when it's ready. And this is where I use the thermometers in the food, because the thermometer on the display is going to be pretty much useless to tell me when the food is above 70 or 80 degrees so that I know that it's safe to take out without condensation. It's going to tell me what the tray temperature, or it's going to tell me what the temperature is between the heater pad and the shelf. That doesn't tell me what the food is on the shelf. So I have those in there kind of in the middle of the food, so I'll know when it's warm enough. Okay, we'll be back in just a few minutes. I've given the freeze dryer a little over 50 minutes, 50 minutes. Now it's nice and toasty warm in there again, the food is. It didn't need 50 minutes, probably 20 minutes would have been okay. But that's how long I gave it, so let's get them out, weigh them, and then put them back in for the 2-hour dry check. They should be dry. I'm going to arrow down past the last of it. Okay. And then open the drain valve. And I am going to switch tray positions like usual. So here's tray 1. Okay, make sure it's zeroed out. 924. Tray 2. 959. I'm going to put tray 2 on the top. And tray 1 down. Okay, tray 3. And these are the ones that are the little quarter-size pieces, quarter of an apple around. 917 and 915. Put tray 4 on that shelf and tray 3 on this shelf. We'll get it restarted. I'm going to give it 2 hours or maybe a little more depending on what I've got going on. And then we'll come back and weigh it and check it. This is the only way I know for sure to check all of the food at one time to make sure that it's dry. Touching it won't tell me. Infrared thermometer won't tell me. A thermal camera won't tell me. It will tell me perhaps if it's warm or perhaps if that one piece is dry. Touching them will tell me if that part that I'm touching is dry to the touch. It will not tell me has all the moisture been driven off and it's safe for storage. Weighing it will tell me. So I'll give it more time. Drain valve closed. Continue. And it's plenty cool. And you see that took 3 minutes. So that part of the dry check process took 3 minutes. If I weren't doing a video of it, it takes 1 minute or less. It's very, very quick. It's not a time-consuming thing, but it will tell me whether or not my food is dry. I'm not going to bag anything that might have moisture in it. If I were to feel them when they're not completely dry, they can still feel completely dry. Like the dry minute rice that we did. Felt completely dry before we put it in, but we got a lot of water out of it. It's a huge difference between dry and freeze-dried dry. Anyway, we'll be back in just a second, so don't go away. It's been about 2 hours and 8 minutes. It's had time to do the dry check. Now we'll take them out and check them to make sure they were dry. If it hasn't lost any weight, then I know that it was already dry, and I'll count the time from before I did all of this as the finish time, which was 34 hours. And even if I want to add the rewarming time of an hour, that would be perfectly acceptable, and that would get it to 35 hours, which is a lot less than the 48 hours that the timer is showing. That's because it took a while to get to it. It usually does. So let's bypass the rest of the time and check it. Okay, it's down to the last 6.5 minutes. I'll bypass it with the down arrow. And I'll open the drain valve. And starting with tray 1. The heaters turn off during the last 15 minutes, so it's been cooling for 8 minutes. And the tray is still quite warm, but it's not scorching. And that's a good thing. So 9:23. That's 2 hours. Okay, that's down by 1, it says. I'm going to re-zero it. Make sure. Okay, so down by 1.
The rule is simple. If it loses weight, put them back in for more drying time until they stop losing weight. I'm about to ignore my own rule and regret it.
That's also down by 1. So I think we're going to be good.
No, we're not going to be good.
Tray 3, 917, no change.
From here, I'll just jump ahead to where I realize I'd screwed up.
And tray 1 and 2, I have the whole round pieces and then the half ones. Then tray 3 and 4 are the quarter slice ones. So these look really nice. It's just, it's harder to put them on the tray. Okay, but we'll get these bagged. I want to check a couple of those. Excellent. I love freeze-dried apples.
I had already bagged one tray and was working on the second. Every piece that I touched felt perfect, no problem at all, until I decided I was going to eat one piece. And that's when I found the piece that had water in it still, and the one next to it. It was a stack of apples that was 4 or 5 pieces high, and so 2 pieces inside a stack had water. I spent the next few seconds trying to decide if I was going to share the shame of having taken them out when they were still losing weight.
Well, heck.
I knew better, but I still did it. So I could either show it, or I could just edit it out and make it look like it never happened and jump to the final where they are dry and then bag them. Which way to go?
I just found a piece of apple with a damp spot in it. Well, it all goes back on the trays.
And I didn't decide until I was actually doing the editing. So if you're seeing this, that means I decided to show it.
Well, the fact that it lost a gram, I should have paid attention to it. I tried to ignore my own rule of not taking things out if they have weight loss. It only had a gram each on 2 trays. But a gram is a decent amount of water, and you don't know where else there might be some water. I should have listened to myself. Anyway, as I was bagging, I found a damp spot on one of them. I'm emptying all back onto the trays, and I'm going to put them back in, and we'll give them additional time. You don't mess with water in the food. So if I had just simply thrown them all in the bags, I would have overlooked that one bit of water because basically I wouldn't have noticed it except I ate the piece and there was a damp spot in the middle of it. Otherwise I wouldn't have found it. Now we'll put them back in there and make sure that they're dry before I bag them. So we'll get them back in there. I'm getting the weights, and since I snacked a little bit, I'll put a new gross weight on the one set because it's not fair that the weight's going to be down a few grams. They were delicious. Okay, we'll get them back in there. I've already restarted the freeze dryer. I did not let it defrost. It has only been a few minutes, so we'll get it back in there. I've got the apples back in there. It's cooling, and it never warmed up very much, so it won't take long. The main thing I want to do is look for the thermometer in the bottom of the barrel, the one that's touching the barrel, to make sure that the barrel gets down to -40. I'm not really worried about the fruit because there's almost no water left in there. But even a very small amount of the bound moisture that hasn't been driven off yet could make the whole thing either spoil later or at least get soft and squishy instead of crisp and crunchy. And if you have super ripe fruit, like super ripe pears, they'll never be crunchy. They'll be more like cotton candy. The first time I did those, I kind of thought it was weird feeling because they never got crunchy. Then I realized that only happened on the really ripe pears. It's because there's no structure left in the pear. It's part of what makes them so creamy and delicious for a camise pear. We'll get this recooled and then we'll come back when it's finished and we'll double check it. And I'm back to check the apples again. It's the next day. I put them back in there because of that cold wet spot that I found, and instead of giving them a couple hours, I just went to bed and let it go to the small batch cycle. So it's been going, well, that doesn't seem right. It says 20 hours. That's not right. Was it? Was it 5:30 last night? Oh yeah, because I could have taken them out at 8. I was too lazy to take them out. It wasn't that it was so late. I was too lazy to take them out. Didn't feel like bagging them last night. And I was going to want to give them 2 more hours, which would put it like 9 or 10 o'clock. So I let them go overnight. Anyway, I'm still going to take them out, weigh them, put them back in for another dry check, and kind of start at that point again and ignore the rest of that earlier stuff. We'll get them out and check them. Bypass the last of that, if we can make it go. Then open the drain valve. And we'll get these weighed
During all the additional re-drying time, tray 2 lost 2 grams. None of the other trays lost any weight.
That's our new starting point. We'll restart it, give it a couple hours for that dry check. I'll come back in 2 more hours and we'll take them out and bag them. And tray 1. And it's 9:21, so no change this time. And that's what it should be. 9:52, no change. Tray 3, 9:16, no change. And tray 4, 9:15. So I'm going to stop the machine with no defrost. So originally, the time that it took to finish them yesterday was 35 hours. And that was well within the range of normal. The previous batches of apples were about 33 to 37 hours. So this one was in that range. I thought they were going to be done. The problem is that I sliced some of them differently and stacked them on the trays differently. So I had multiple rings of the apples stacked perfectly one on top of the other, as opposed to normally it's kind of a jumble in there. So there's no bunches of apple slices all stacked together. So that seems to be the big difference, because the amount of weight of the apples didn't change, the variety of apples didn't change, the way I sliced them and loaded the trays did change. Tray 2 is the one that it went bad on yesterday, because I found the apple slice that still had a bit of moisture. And you know, I had them stacked too thick, and more importantly, I had them stacked so that they really were a tight fit. So it would be kind of like trying to freeze dry half an apple that hadn't been cut. We'll get these bagged, and I'll use the same measurements before because it's so close to what it was before. So just over 60 grams, so about 60.7 grams per pound. The amount of apples that was a pound is only 60.7 grams now. So we'll get those bagged up now. And I'll probably have one bag that's going to be short because of snacking. And there we go, 3/4 of a pound in the bag. It's about 2 apples worth. I ended up with 11 1-quart bags of the apples. Each one of them has approximately 3/4 of a pound of wet weight. Now it's only about 60 grams. I'm going to add a 300 cc oxygen absorber to each one, zipper them shut, and then heat seal them. Okay, I'm kind of tucking them down the side a bit, keep them out of the way of the seal and the zipper. Okay, we'll get them heat sealed, putting the bag at the top edge, or the top edge of the bag, in line with the seal strip, so I get a full seal. I'm going to do that first one twice to make sure that it's all the way up to temperature, and then it's melting it shut. Okay, perfect seal, and room for a couple more tries if I mess it up. Now I'm going to add the gross weight of the bags onto the bag. So this 86 grams is what this bag weighs right now. And if it starts to get heavier, I'll be able to tell that moisture is getting in. And like this bag, if it's bouncing between 2 numbers, I'll pick the higher number. Okay, as soon as those are all marked, we'll move over and put them in a bin. So these 11 bags of apples are going to go into bin 6 front. I know I have space because my little high-tech piece of blue tape tells me I still have space in this bin. So it doesn't really matter as much where I put any of the things, as long as I put them in my database, I can find them again. So the fact that there's other stuff already in here that aren't apples doesn't really matter. I'll look for apples, I'll look for either the oldest date or a variety, and I'll be able to find them here. So this is where they'll be when we come to look for them. Another batch of apples, freeze-dried and ready for future use. So on to the next batch. Thanks for watching.